Hey guys, this is the Olympic Weightlifting for Sports Performance workshop, and this is a day from our National Accreditation Level 2 certification. As much as it says this is Olympic Weightlifting for Sports Performance, I want everyone kind of walking away from here getting ideas that is not just specific to the sports performance field as well. The concepts and the methods behind today's workshop are very much applicable to anybody you could train. It's nice to see some familiar faces, so I won't spend too much time on this because you know my background. I would have spent the bulk of my S&C career working with Leinster Rugby through the RFU, based in the academy. So if you watched the Six Nations recently and you saw Ireland absolutely smashing them, but a lot of those guys that are playing there, I would have worked with them from the age of 15 up to about 21, and it's really good to see that finally the guys are in a position that, you know, a player gets injured, someone else comes on and takes right over. I think it was probably one of the strengths that England had for years, and to be fair, they still do have. Player gets injured and another player goes on and performs the same role, and that pretty much came through that academy structure, which I enjoyed being part of. Would have done the exact same model and philosophy when I worked with Dublin football. But if you know me well, you'll understand that weightlifting is my true passion. And when I joined the academy, it was the weightlifting kind of power speed element that I was challenged with in terms of taking over as a remit at academy level and really improving that performance element. So what I essentially did was I was like, okay, if I want to become better at coaching weightlifting, the best thing I thought I could do was go to a weightlifting club and learn how to be coached by a weightlifting coach. And then look at those principles and then adapt them for performance. And that model is essentially what I've that model's evolved, and I've added to that over the years, about working in Leinster Rugby, but then also figuring out, well, how do you then modify that when you're working with an amateur team like Dublin football or a soccer club or a school or with the under 16s hockey players, because, you know, if you only see them once a week or once every 2 weeks, how can we get those same adaptations? And I think that's been a big part of the journey and the evolution over the last 10 years. So that's essentially what I'll be presenting here today. So what we'll be looking at is, you know, the practical applications of Olympic weightlifting for sports performance and performance in general, why and how we can use weightlifting and their derivatives. So it doesn't just have to be the full weightlifting movements. The benefits of Olympic weightlifting, the APEC coaching model, and we'll go through the hang power snatch in the first practical and then the hang power clean in the second practical. We'll then in the afternoon talk about training recommendations and then programming fundamentals. So if we look at Olympic weightlifting, I think everyone in the room understands that we have a snatch and we have a clean and jerk, and that those two exercises have come from the two competition lifts. And there are, if you watch weightlifting being performed in competition, a few different ways the snatch can be performed. We have our bilateral snatch, and the secondary one is the split snatch. Not performed as much these days, it was very much previously. And then the same when we look at the clean, we can see more variations in the jerk. We've got our, what we would call our traditional split jerk, but then we also have our power jerk, or potentially our squat jerk, that's also prevalent. So there's more than one way to perform any of those movements. But why do they take place in sports performance programs? Well, I mean, by just even looking at the clips in the video, you can clearly see, you know, the agility that's required, the balance, the coordination, the flexibility, the timing, the strength, the speed, the power. So you get a lot of bang for your buck in just one exercise alone. And when you can do that exercise well, it also looks sexy, so it also helps. So the research seems to suggest that, you know, there's a high percentage of strength conditioning practitioners, get rid of that, in the United States that use weightlifting movements and their derivatives in their program. The common goal for sports performance programs are to improve performance, okay? And it's the same with anyone you train. If you're training someone and they have a goal, you're designing that program to improve that goal. If that's not working, we've got to ask questions of ourselves and look at, well, what can we change to ensure that they are attaining those goals? And then we've got to look at, well, how can we use the weightlifting movements to improve our power production? Can anyone think potentially why coaching weightlifting as part of, or their derivatives as part of a program is more popular in the US compared to what it potentially might be over here in Europe? It's more popular now, but if we think of maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, why do you think it wasn't as used, or didn't place a massive emphasis in the programs over here? Sorry? Yeah, that's a really good one. Potentially didn't understand what the benefits could be. Can we think of any others?
You have the coaches there, or structure there.
Yeah, I think the structure is really good one. It was events like this where you can actually learn how to adopt these methods and implement them into programs. So another element, and I think CrossFit is massively to thank for this, is the accessibility to equipment. So I remember when I first went to dive in deep about 10 years ago about how I wanted to improve my ability to become better at the snatch and clean and jerk, to be coached by a weightlifting coach. There was only one club in the entire province of Leinster where not only there was a weightlifting club, where there were barbells that could spin, and you had bumper plates and platforms where you could drop the equipment on. So because CrossFit has really popularized both the movements but also the accessibility to equipment, it's very affordable now to buy barbells that have bearings in them, to buy bumper plates, and to have rubber flooring available. So I think that the access and the education component has really made it available, and then through events like this that we can actually help educate on how we can use it. So if we look at the force and power characteristics, and we look at this picture right here, we can clearly see a range between what elements produce peak force and rate of force development, and we can see that it's quite natural that the weightlifting movements and their derivatives have much higher power qualities than your non-ballistic movements. And that's not something that's rocket science either. It's very prevalent. So if we think of weightlifting movements, can we think of positional, like biomechanics, that have similarities in some of the field-based sports that take place? So can you think of positions that athletes get into on the pitch that would be very similar?
Just for the start position.
Start position could be, yeah. You're quite flexed over. Can you think of other ones as well? Yeah, so you're going through that triple extension pattern. Very, very good. So again, these movements happen. So you can see even jumping movements as well. Catching, so they may not always be perfect, but the initial takeoff would be. Again, and you can see that athletic profile, that kind of quarter squat position. So these movements, they happen quite regularly. So if we can teach the athletes how to move, or teach our clients how to move more efficiently in the gym environment with a barbell, and teach them how to do these movements explosively, the weightlifting model fits that one quite nicely. So, we're looking to improve the athlete's performance. Okay, that's our goal. But what adaptations are we looking at when we look to improve performance? What can we think of? Neurological will be one. Anything else?
Physical.
Yeah. Speed would be another one.
Muscular power.
Yeah, so I see that. So if we think of that force velocity curve, we can look at those adaptations. And that's exactly what we're looking at. Is we're looking at improving adaptations and not getting too caught up on a specific exercise, for example, because there are many exercises that we can attach to any of those adaptations that we're looking to improve. So you will have seen this slide before if you were at the speed workshop. If we look at training specificity, if you've seen this slide before, I'll try and ask you not to answer it, okay? But if we look at a sporting skill, let's say for example, like sprinting, what's the most specific exercise you could replicate or you could do that would improve someone's sprinting performance?
Running, just running over distance or running short time for me.
Good, that's a good one. What are you thinking?
What would the sled on back there?
Yeah, that would also be a good one. and they're both very good answers. The most specific way to improve someone's acceleration or any part of their sprinting would be by doing that exercise. As soon as we move away from that, we are just that little bit less specific, and that's totally fine as long as we understand why we're doing it and what adaptation we're looking to develop that's going to make us then better at that sporting skill. So, you know, the 5 principles of dynamic correspondence are a really nice they're a nice tool for us to look at when we're looking to improve adaptations, and then when we're looking to select exercises to see, well, how many of these principles do they tick, do they adhere to, and then that helps justify our rationale behind why we're choosing a specific exercise to improve an adaptation. So if we look at the speed execution here of a box squat, we can see that at the end of the concentric movement, velocity is 0, okay? And that's totally fine because the goal here is to improve maximal strength. If we can look at the speed execution of a jump, or vertical jump, and as you can see here the player's performing a counter movement jump, you can see that at the end of that concentric movement, velocity is quite high, okay? And that's essentially what weightlifting is. It's jumping with barbells. So again, if we look at that acceleration movement you just mentioned there, like exploding out of the blocks, if we look at this nice little video here, we can see that you've got a high velocity at the end of that hip extension movement. And again, we've got really high velocity, and that's where we have our peak velocity at the end of that second pull. There's a nice dynamic correspondence there. So, if we look at Olympic lifts and their derivatives, do you reckon it's possible to potentially pinpoint them somewhere on that force velocity curve? And if so, where do you reckon they lie? What do you think, guys?
Around speed strength.
Yeah.
So you think a bit around that, yeah.
Around here, yeah. Anyone think that it could be higher or lower? Yeah. Really good. And probably it's really simple to look at an adaptation and go, that's where I want it to be. And what do you think helps with that? So for example, you said, look, I think it lies in this realm there. If you were going to choose an exercise, for example, let's say a hang power clean, what would be the difference between, that's okay. What would be the difference between performing a hang power clean and getting a speed strength adaptation versus a strength speed adaptation? The velocity, wouldn't it? And what else?
The weight.
The load, exactly. So we could have a hang power clean and we can make it both a strength speed exercise or a speed strength exercise.
Just depending on
Yeah, if someone is technically proficient, the weight's going to dictate the velocity, and it's really nice that we can really simplify it like that. So, particularly if we look at the adaptation we want, specifically looking at the research for our weightlifting derivatives, kind of falls in that like moderate force and moderate velocity, and the research seems to suggest that potentially it's a more useful tool to develop our strength speed qualities compared to our speed strength. Now look, that's not to say that you cannot use a weightlifting derivative to improve speed strength. There may be more beneficial, or there may be better exercises you could choose to elicit those adaptations. So could you maybe think of a different exercise that could improve your speed strength quality? Wouldn't be a bad one, but think of it in the form of a loaded exercise. Not a bad one, but there'd be one that'd be better than that again. A hex bar jump squat. So really good research with hex bar jump squat by Tommy Turner et al. He looked at the hex bar jump squat versus the conventional barbell jump squat and the hang power clean. And what he found was that when it came to maximizing peak power, in an unloaded environment, I mean, to completely maximize peak power values, an unloaded jump achieves that. But as soon as we start to look at adding load to that aspect, the hex bar jump squat was superior to the barbell jump squat and the hang power clean. And can you think of potentially why? So if we think of like the hang, or that the counter movement jump was the one with the highest peak power value, can we think of maybe why hex bar jump squat versus jump squat with the bar on the back compared to hang power clean?
Similar
weight.
Similar mechanics.
Yeah, so if you think of counter movement jump, hex bar, pretty much the exact same mechanics, okay, or very, very similar to it, where when the bar was loaded on the back, it changed the biomechanics of it. And then the same with the hang power clean. So look, don't get me wrong, it's not that you can't achieve speed strength qualities with either a loaded jump squat with the bar on your back or a hang power clean. The research seems to suggest at this moment in time that you would optimize it with a hex bar jump squat with lighter loads again. So again, coming down that force velocity curve, I think it was the load range was between, and this was done on the Leinster Academy players, I think it was between 30 to 50 kilograms. And again, it was a range of loads. They couldn't pinpoint one particular load, but it was more a range of loads and optimize the peak power window. And so that's the part of the curve that we kind of, again, we don't want to label a specific exercise, but when we look at exercises, that one just seemed to be better for developing that quality. But when it came to the strength speed part of the curve and improving peak rate of force development, the hang power clean and their derivative, so the hang high pull, optimized peak rate of force development. And the load ranges there again at the time were in and around body weight. So if we look at rate of force development, really what rate of force development is development of muscular force as a function of time, or essentially how quickly an athlete can develop force. So if we look at these two athletes here, let's say for example they're both the exact same height, okay? They've got the same vertical jumps, they've got the same counter movement jump scores, they have the same maximal strength qualities, so they can both squat 100 kilos. They're 1RM on the squat, their PB is 100 kilos, and their PB in the counter movement jump, let's say for argument's sake, is 45 centimeters, so that's the exact same. Technically, their position under the bar, their position under the ball that they're standing is about the same, or would be the same, and the angle of jump they're going to take is the same. So, who's going to win the ball, do you reckon? Okay, so again, we talked about they've got the same max strength qualities, so they can both squat 100 kilos at their one RM. So athlete A, if we look at force developed over time, or force expressed over time, in terms of squatting 100 kilos, they can both squat 100 kilos, okay? This is the force time curve of athlete A. The green dotted line and the purple straight line is the force time curve of athlete B. Put up your hands if you think athlete A would stand a better chance given the previous kind of notes. So put up your hands if you think athlete A stands the best chance of getting to that ball first. Okay, put up your hand if you think it's athlete B. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, then I think of why. That's exactly it. So it's the rate of force development is superior, and we can see that like those are the qualities we look at. If we look at sporting activities, jumping and sprinting, it's all about achieving stuff within a certain time remit. Those are the challenges that we have, and then those are the specific adaptations and qualities we're looking to develop. So again, if we look at some of the movements, look at the speed of the second pull and the drive and the jerk again, we see the time characteristic, so it's in around that 200 milliseconds. So that's why you've got to produce force very, very quickly, very similar to the movements on the pitch. The other thing is a really beautiful part of having to accelerate through triple extension. Okay, so the acceleration process goes right through that triple extension. We've got the second pull, which is mechanically similar to other sporting movements. So you can see that triple flexion, albeit vectors are slightly different in terms of vertical versus horizontal. But again, we've got that full triple extension accelerating right through that. And then we found that the rate of force development in the second pull is the highest recorded across all areas of force velocity curve. So again, it's very much adaptation specific. If we wanted to improve peak power, we could look at a few different exercises, but because we're looking to develop peak rate of force development, the second pull and the peak and the rate of force development there was at its highest. So I showed you this slide earlier, and I was just alluding to this, that peak power values. But if we then look at the rate of force development values, you can see they're much higher in the Olympic lifting movement, particularly from the mid-thigh position. So I purposely have gone through that so we can start moving, because I think we've captured the first piece. A lot of us, everyone actually here is really good, is on the ball with all those coaching points, and even in terms of selecting athlete B over A. Shane, I think it's the first time we've had everyone just get that straight away, so you've grasped that concept of rate of force development. What we're also going to do is that we've looked at that force velocity curve, and we want to be very specific when we're going to do the hang power snatch in terms of targeting an area of that force velocity curve to see, how can we maximize that adaptation. And the best way we find of doing that, that's readily available, that doesn't require us to use a force plate, is using a push band. So we've brought a couple of push bands with us, so we can actually be very specific once we get through the technical model, and then we'll actually have some fun and lift and look at what loads can we lift technically well, okay, to stick within that threshold to ensure that that's the adaptation we're looking for. Okay, that sound good? Yeah. So just take 2-3 minutes, and then we get into a warm up, and then we'll go through our full model of how to coach the hang power snatch. Okay, guys. So for the second part of the theory aspect, we're going to go through training recommendations, program fundamentals, and then we'll go through the hang power clean coaching model, which similar to the hang power snatch. So that we've kind of covered the fundamentals in the hang power snatch, which means we'll get to the fun stuff on the hang power clean much quicker. I think everyone enjoyed interacting with the push band and looking at the velocities that we can try and play around with. So what I want us to do is we'll just split into 2 groups. It'll be much easier. We'll go 3 and 4. Okay, so group number 1, group number 2, and I want you to list exercises that you think would be in the following 3 sections. Okay, so if we want to think of the weightlifting exercises and their derivatives, what weightlifting exercises would we choose as primary exercises? What would we look at then as assistance exercises, and what potentially could be an accessory? So I'll help you and I'll guide you through this. So for example, if we look at a power snatch, could be a primary exercise that we could choose. An assistance exercise could be a hang high pull, okay, and then an accessory exercise could be an upright row. Okay, so does that help in terms of the what distinguishes the difference between primary, assistance and accessory? So what I'll do is I'll give you 5 minutes. As always with this section, let's remain friends. Okay, we can definitely discuss and we can agree to disagree within groups.
If you put your like a muscle snatch, would that be an assistant?
I would put a muscle snatch down as an accessory.
Right.
Yeah. But if you put it down as an assistance, I'm definitely happy for us to discuss it.
Right.
Yeah. That sound good? All right. We got 5 minutes. Off we go. Okay, so we've remained friends. Excellent. Don't worry, we will revisit this. We're going to talk about program design later on. It gets really spicy once we do that. Okay, so this group over here, let's talk through what we would put in the primary section.
Clean jerk as a primary.
Yeah.
Assistance, we had hang clean, hang high pull.
Yeah.
and then as accessory front squat and a...
Was it a hang clean into a high pull or just as two separate exercises?
As an example.
Yeah. No, that's perfect.
And then we were saying, was it the jerk as well, being for that?
We're going between assistance or accessory for the jerk.
For the jerk, you were wondering about.
We weren't sure. There was a question mark on the jerk.
That's okay. What do you reckon? So there's a few ways of looking at this. One is the jerk could be a primary exercise.
Oh yeah.
Okay. But what we can also do is we can target it as something we want to additionally work on. So you could put it down as well as an assistance exercise.
What differentiates between a squat jerk, a split squat jerk, or a behind the neck? Or would you just play around with that?
Yeah, so what we could do, one way of looking at it is if you decide that there's if you decide which one you want to have as your performance exercise. Let's say, for example, the split jerk is your performance exercise, then we could look at that being the primary. Exercise, and then assistance to that we could look at power jerks, squat jerks, push presses again. So that's why we can have this here, and then it's kind of like the jerk derivatives could go down as our assistant exercises.
Power jerk, squat jerk, and what's the other one?
Push press could be another one.
Oh, yeah.
And look, yes, but then also we can make the likes of a push press and a strict press both an assistance exercise as well as an accessory exercise. So there's a rationale for either or.
Just if I could a question, is there a definition, a clear definition of what is assistance and what is accessory?
Yes, so if we look at the assistance exercise, essentially that is what we're looking at there is we're looking to choose an exercise that's going to improve the adaptation for our primary exercise, either within the next session or the next couple of sessions, okay? Then when we look at our accessory section, essentially what we're doing there is we're looking at improving potential imbalances primarily around specific muscle groups or potentially energy systems that would then, again, in turn improve the assistance capacity and the primary factor. So does that make sense?
So
Yeah.
maybe put another way, like structural balance type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So what would you currently have down as your accessory exercise?
Front squat.
We had squats with various different squats.
Good. So what I would look at there is that there'd be an argument and a case to put potentially the front squat in as the assistant exercise, okay, to the primary lift of the clean. And then what you could look at in for your accessory exercise would be something like maybe you could target a split squat, or what we want to do is we want to look at more, say, potential isolation exercises. So what part of the front squat then is weak for an individual? Is it more anterior, posterior? Is it thoracic based? And that's when you target that in the accessory section.
Would overhead squat be assistance then?
Yeah, overhead squat can be assistance, 100%, yeah.
So like a lot of people I coach have a muted hip is very common. So like when I look at accessory work, I look at volume.
Exactly.
Volume.
Yep.
So for me, like a muted hip is common. So often kettlebell are in there with it because there's a hinge part underneath.
Yep.
So that's how
That's like you're right on the money there, and let's say we had a nice pattern there going with the jerk, for example, right? So we could look at split jerk, then as our primary lift. In terms of assistance, we could look at some jerk variations, going right down into the likes of a press, and then in terms of your accessories is when you can look at targeting delts and triceps. So, for example, say with triceps, if that's an area you want to focus and improve upon, we can look at being very specific and look at, say, a cable or banded extension overhead, or we can be more general and look at something like dips.
Could you, or would you, look at it from a player specific? So obviously you may be doing, say, you're doing a clean and jerk, you may find they can clean but they can't jerk, so then you would plan that way.
Yeah. Definitely, that's a really good. It's a very good example, Wes. So, right there, you would look at the assistance and the accessory portion. You would look at those two sections to drive more of the jerk aspect, compared to the clean. Because, like, hypothetically, say someone can clean 120 kilos, but they can only jerk 100. And that's when we look at, well, how can we target that? Is it a technical issue? And then from a technical point of view, can we put in some complexes in the assistance section? And then from a strength or an imbalance point of view, in terms of the structure, we can target that in the accessory section. And yeah, you know, more than often, the accessory section is going to be the one that has higher volume, less load. Assistance section potentially has moderate of both, and our primary section has lower volumes and higher intensity. All right, let's talk about what you guys have discussed. Cleans, yeah. Excellent. And the assistance?
Clean ankles from knee floor.
From where, sorry?
From hip, knee.
Yeah, so we've made it into a complex. Yeah. Nice.
And same with like clean pulls, so just you without your neck.
And then in the accessory section?
So upright rows.
Love it. Good. So this is excellent, guys.
So like you know, saying so we like break it down to your deadlift from the floor to your knee to hip, and then things like back extensions and.
Exactly, you can indeed. So breaking down the likes of the deadlift portion there for the clean pull, you could throw that in the assistance section, and then yes, in terms of then pinpointing finer details of that rear chain, in terms of your back extensions or good mornings, you can throw that in the accessory section. Okay, that was really good. Okay, so we are going to move on to next slide. Let's move this out of the way. Oop. Okay, so again, and some of these exercises we've talked about in terms of where they fit in the primary, assistance and accessory section. So, you know, pretty much when we're looking at the primary exercises, they're either the classical exercise or a derivative of them. And then when we look at the assistance exercise, we're looking at variations in terms of the start or finish portion of that primary lift, as well as variations through complexes where we can combine a couple of movements from a technical point of view. It's a really nice way of doing that. And again, variations and derivatives of the different squat and deadlift or pull exercises. And then, yeah, look, our accessory exercises are general lower limb and upper limb and core exercises that we're specifically targeting to improve any imbalances that may be present. And this is just a snapshot of options. Think of it like as a menu, and there's like many more. And what would be the driving factor behind choosing something for any of these variations if you were going to program them? Or what would you feel would be a main driver behind that?
Mobility.
Yeah, so that definitely 100%.
What's the weakest link?
Yeah, so figuring out what can they do, you know, and then you almost have like a process of elimination. So if they can't do anything overhead, that essentially pretty much removes the snatch and the jerk. And like we talked about earlier on, if it feels different from the floor, potentially they actually can't get into a strong position from the floor. Well, then we remove the portion from the floor and work either from the hang, which can be done from blocks, or from pins as well. So if we look at the assistance exercises, again we have options, and primarily if we look at our squatting options, what would be most specific to improve any of the weightlifting movements, really we look at the front squat, which would improve your clean, your overhead squat, which will improve your snatch, and your back squat, which is your your general squat exercise, because it'll be the one that you can lift the most load with. And then the same when we look at our pull variations, we have our clean and snatch pulls. We can work from the hang, from blocks, from deficits, and the same when it comes to anything for the jerk and the press variations. Push presses, strict presses, you've got your jerk balances, your squat jerks. I mean, there's stuff from behind the neck that can be done as well. There's a lot of options there. And we kind of touched off this a little bit this morning. So what we reckon is the optimal load to complete an exercise?
Depending what you want to get.
Yeah. So again, it's about the adaptation, isn't it? It's depending on what that adaptation is. So if that adaptation is going to be a strength speed adaptation, what do we reckon the optimal load would be? Again, so it's instead of thinking load, it's going to be dependent on the velocity, isn't it? So the first goal is to perform the lift technically well, okay? Because the load will initially be very much determined by technique, and I think we kind of found that as well when we were playing around with that with the push device. You know, if we're technically really sound, and as we increase the load and the technique remains the same, well then we have an opportunity to see can we push the boundaries. But if technique breaks down, well then the reliability aspect of that is diminished. So we talked about this earlier, and again, optimal load again is very much going to be dependent on what part of that force velocity curve we want to target. So if we again want to be specific and make it a strength speed adaptation, then we can look at those thresholds there between 0.75 and 1 meter per second. And then if we want to increase that velocity threshold and we want to play around with 1 to 1.5 meters per second, well, it becomes a speed strength exercise. And like we talked about earlier on, that's completely justified. Yeah, are there other exercises we could use? We definitely can. But if we forget about which exercise we're looking at and we want to figure out, well, what load is going to give us that best adaptation, what helps us answer that question is what velocity band and threshold are we working with?
If I'm programming
Yep.
based on these principles, and are these only for the primary lift? So is it important that my accessory work is hitting a consistent velocity as well? Or is it better to spend more time and attention for certain movements?
I think when it comes to accessories, I wouldn't use the push band to focus on where my threshold would be, because again, there's a less risk of injury when it comes to the accessory portion in terms of working on, you know, our back extensions or our bicep curls and our tricep pushdowns compared to our heavy loaded compound movements. So with that, I think you're dead right in terms of what you said. Time under tension becomes a primary driver there, 100%. So next what we're going to do is we're going to look at a video of a couple of the athletes I coach. These are some of the hockey players that I work with. So the challenge for you is going to be trying to figure out which is the fastest rep without being able to see the velocity data. So just with the naked eye, can you pick out which rep is quicker? And I'll show you again. The first rep you'll see Jackie do is 35 kilo power clean. The second rep you'll see her do, well, it'll be a second set, it's a completely different set, will be a 40 kilo power clean. And the third set is 45. So we'll go back. So that's 35. That's 40. And that's 45. So imagine you don't have push, okay? Naked eye, is it easy to tell which load is the fastest? Who thinks 35 kilos was the fastest? Okay, so we've won at 35. Who thinks 40 kilo was the fastest? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Who thinks 45 was the fastest? No one? I'll show you once more. See if anyone wants to change their mind. you reckon there's much between any of those 3 sets?
Not massively, no. She struggles more on the last one, but it's not saying she's struggling to get off the ground. She might have more intent, so actually maybe quicker.
She got underneath quicker, so that's where it could have been
But
potentially.
she's struggling with the
Oh,
phase
well,
of it.
we'll show you. No one wants to change?
Oh, I'm thinking it might be 45.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she got underneath quicker.
1.13 meters per second. And I'm not lying, so I'm actually zooming in because it's really important to show that I'm not telling any tales here, okay? Five kilos heavier and she moves a little bit quicker. So we've added 5 kilos and she's moved it 0.02 meters per second quicker. Not much, but a little bit, you know, it's quicker. So we add another 5 kilos. So here's the deal, right? Is it within a strength speed threshold? Yes, because remember the strength speed threshold is 0.75 to 1 meters per second. However, with my beginner and intermediate athletes, and I would still classify Jackie as that zone in between. Granted, I've been coaching her for 2 years, but only really once a week do I get 15 minutes to coach that lift as part of that S&C program, okay? Hey, you're okay. So for 15 minutes over 2 years, is she lifting with, is her technique good? Yes. Could it be better? Definitely, because she just needs more exposure. But here's a prime example. So what I like to do here is I like to drive her above that 1 meter per second. So I'm very much giving a threshold of the speed strength realm, because until she gets to the intermediate to advanced stage, then I'll say, okay, now we can stick between the 0.75 meters per second, and then I'd be happy with that. If you watch it again, you'll see there is an element of the extra 5 kilos being a bit more of a drop off than the previous 5 kilos. And that's what you'll find. Sometimes you're going up in 5 kilos, you're going up in 5 kilos. Another 5 kilos is just too much. It might only need to be 1 or 2 kilos. So we'll do the same now with Robin, another one of my female hockey athletes. And again, I have to stress, so this is a field-based athlete who only gets 15 minutes of weightlifting coaching as part of the program per week. She actually missed that because she knew she was being recorded and that it was being done for a presentation, so she got a little nervous. And then she gets it, so I'll show it to you again. Before I show it to you, who thinks 35 is the fastest? No. Okay, who thinks 40 was the fastest? No. Who thinks 45 is the fastest? 2?
Yeah, I think 45.
Yeah? Okay. So we'll show them to you again and then we'll show you the actual speeds. Okay, we'll scrap that one because we know she misses this one. So first one, 35, 1.2 meters per second. Again, not lying. Second one. So again, a little faster. 0.04 meters per second quicker at 40. And again, that drop off by going that extra 5 kilos. So with both of them, what the feedback that I've given them is that the load we're working with for them is 40. They can do 45, but there's enough of a drop off there for me to think they need more exposure at that 40 kilos, which is at a higher velocity, which the research and the information available is going to give them those adaptations. Then we talk about catch versus no catch. Remember there was that video, that rep where she didn't get the catch? I kept it in there for a reason. It'll look initially like I forgot to take it out. It's there for a reason. Do you reckon it's quicker or slower than the power clean? Why?
Because she pulls faster,
But she forgets to catch it. Yeah, she has a brain fart essentially. You're right, she does. Remember, the one she caught was 0.9 meters per second. Here's the one she doesn't catch. It's 1.38 meters per second. So we talked about this earlier. Was it Ben? Yeah. So remember we talked about, if you have a client or a group of athletes that you're coaching and they just haven't got that mobility to catch something overhead or potentially even catch it in a front rack position. And I've come across this a lot, particularly if you work with field-based athletes, whether that be rugby players, Gaelic football players, soccer players. It's not the end of the world. We can still do the movement without catching it. And at times we can actually, potentially with the same load, get a much faster movement because we're removing some of the technical aspects out of it. Now we don't get the fast eccentric overload in terms of the catch, which is, there is something cool about it. There's also something very pretty about being able to catch, but we don't have to get caught up on it. So what do we think is the best exercise to choose?
One that fits the purpose,
Yeah.
So it depends on the point of the chosen limit.
Yeah. So what kind of process would we take?
So for a sprinter who needs to go over a distance, looking at agile strength over a distance, not having to catch with a high clean force, it's very useful.
Yeah.
But for someone who has to be a lot more mobile in their field, having to use a high hang snatch might be a more appropriate lift. That depends on the reason you're using the lift.
Okay, so that's a really good point, Ben. So you think what would help would be looking at the specificity of the sport to promote the adaptation?
Yeah.
Okay, Wes, what do you think?
The aim is to make them strong, is whatever movement is to make them, they can lift the most, they can move the force at the right speed, because obviously you can then hopefully create that into the sport specific movement because they're stronger. So if they're strong first, then they can correct, like differentiate strength in a different way.
Yeah.
Different movement. Whereas if you're doing it the other way around, I don't think you'd be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that's really good.
experience, like training ages.
Definitely, I think that one helps an awful lot. That's a huge driver for when I program. So I can definitely see where you're coming from with that, Ben. Perhaps another way of looking at it is not necessarily the sport, because remember it's adaptation specific. So that rugby player, when he's sprinting, is trying to sprint and he's trying to accelerate and sprint just like a sprinter would. So remember, if the goal is to improve rate of force development, almost the sport is irrelevant with the exception of the sport of weightlifting. Okay, so I would still look at, I think you used two very good examples, but both exercises you selected would work very well in reverse of those examples as well. So it's more about, think about, again, the adaptation. If the adaptation is to improve rate of force development, it falls into the strength speed category. And if it falls into that category, we want to think about velocity, specificity. But then very much we look at the individual and how much access we have in order to be able to, one, coach and program for them in general, and then what piece of or how much time of that coaching is going to be dedicated towards improving different adaptations. And the longer you will have a client or a group of athletes for, the more time you get to do the full lift potentially, the less time you have with an individual. Of course there will be restrictions placed there upon that.
You mentioned a few times about using movements that the athlete can do
Yes.
as a preference. Most of my last 8 years working with brain injuries, taking people who can't do things and specifically working on things that they struggle to do because that has a greater level of adaptation, neurological adaptation. So for you looking at performance,
Yes.
is it a much better place to start with people doing something they're comfortable at? Is that a greater way of getting adaptation for performance?
Definitely, if you've minimal time with them. 100%. Again, it's one thing we always look at: how much time have we got with whether it's a singular client, and if you're coaching someone one-on-one, you have more quality time with that person than if you're coaching a group of athletes. So we've got 15 minutes in both scenarios. Well, one-on-one, you can see every single detail of that rep. Where if you've got a squad of 20 for 15 minutes, you can't keep your eye on everybody. And they're the challenges we're faced with. But what really helps with that is the sequence of technical progressions that we do. Allows you to do that with a large group of people, a large audience, whether it be 5, 6 or 20. That's where that model really works well. So I think like some really good points there from everyone involved. So if we look at the floor versus the hang, could we think of why one would override the other, or is it kind of a scenario of tomato, potato?
Injury.
Mobility.
Yeah, very good. Anything else?
I'll say from the floor, I think can you get more? You can get more muscle activation because you're using it for a bigger range. So
yeah, the range definitely does increase. Yeah, there's
More technical.
sorry.
More technical.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get to that point in a little bit. I think there's far more. You need a greater degree of technical competence to perform it from the floor as well as you do from the hang, because the margins of error amongst someone who's only doing something for 15 minutes a week become greater. But at the same time, if that becomes someone you get to coach for longer, you stand a really good argument and a rationale behind, like what you said there, Ben, which is that you then get a larger range of movement, and we get more muscle fiber activation.
Could you just split it? So say you wanted to do both, so you wanted to put a bit more weight, so you put that maybe the deadlift as the I know you'd maybe doing the snatch or whatever, but you put the deadlift as the primary, and then put that as the second hang as the...
Yeah, or another way of looking at that in the same way would be that your max strength exercise, for example, could be a pull exercise or a deadlift exercise, which doesn't have to be performed at such high speeds, because you're focusing on developing max strength, but it's in the same grip and the same style, for example, that you want the clean to be, and then your strength speed exercise becomes the hang power version, 100%. Again, it's a really good way of showing you the different options and the variations, and that really no one is wrong. I think we've all explained a really good rationale for why we would use one particular one over the other. So again, if we look at the catch versus no catch, can we think of, and we've talked about a little bit about it, we've touched off it, can we think of why we would catch versus why we would not catch?
flexibility, if someone just can't get that position.
Wrist mobility and
Yeah.
thoracic mobility if you can't get into that position from straight away.
I find it increases confidence. If you tell somebody they haven't got to catch it, often they better the velocity.
Definitely, I've seen that. It's weird. I don't know why, but I found a lot of individuals in this setting got to a point where, and it's funny because it has nothing to do with velocity or body weight ratios, but they could all do 120, whether they weighed 120 kilos or weighed 80 kilos, but ask them to do 125, and the velocity slowed down massively. There was a fear element to it. It was really funny. I just found that some players, they got to a certain stage and they just got scared beyond a certain load with catching. But when we asked them not to catch it, that element of fear was taken away instantly, and they were able to complete a high pull technically well with large loads at ultra fast velocities. So I think there's a fear element there you're dead right with, because they're not weightlifters. There's always an element of fear, but like weightlifters are crazy by nature. I mean, think about it, they're throwing themselves under large loads very quickly. Where these, if you work with a field-based athlete, they're fearless when it comes to the pitch. So it's funny how that fear aspect can creep in terms of a specific exercise, and we can simply modify by removing the catch, and we get the performance adaptation we want. The way I use this one though, again, it comes a time thing. So if I have a person I'm coaching for a couple of years, I initially like to teach them to catch, because I feel like it completes the lift. But that's from a technical point of view. When it comes to the loaded aspect, as long as they can do it and they feel comfortable with it, we will do it. And then really once we get past that 2-year mark, and again, it's not 2 years of just coaching a lift, it's 2 years where once a week for 15 minutes, they're able to improve their technique, then I kind of give them a level of autonomy, because they know themselves when they walk in, you know, how fresh they are, how comfortable they are, if there's going to be an element of fear there. And if they feel like catching, I let them catch, and if they don't want to catch, that's totally okay as well, because we can still get that adaptation. And I generally find that when they make that when they make that decision, it almost gives me, and this is very anecdotal and very specific within the population that I coach, but it gives me an instant kind of readiness of this is how they're feeling when they want to catch. I know they're firing on all cylinders and they're feeling very fresh and they're not as battered and they're not as bruised. And generally when they want to do a high pull and they don't want to catch, I know that they're still a little bit sore from the game at the weekend, or they might have, you know, a nagging wrist or shoulder. And we talked about, you know, catching at power depth versus catching at squat depth. Are there advantages of one versus the other? What do we think?
When it's really heavy, you probably can't put it as high as you want it, so the mobility is going to help the person. You can't lift it as high.
Yeah, so mobility would definitely be one aspect. I mean, instantly, even between the two of them, can we see a massive difference? What's the biggest thing that stands out, apart from the fact that one's a Leinster player, the other one's a Chinese national weightlifter? Yeah, there's something that stands out way more than that alone.
Weight on the bar.
The weight on the bar. Okay, that's the one that immediately stands out. So you can lift more when you complete a full clean compared to a power clean. Okay, now the goal when you want to lift as much weight as possible becomes more closer to the force aspect of the curve. Do you get me? So again, it's very much adaptation specific. You know, I would very much like to challenge someone who says, you know, well, I can lift more if you let me do a full clean. And I say, yeah, that's fine as long as it's within the threshold. Then I've no.
I feel more confident. I can pull and get into a squat clean more than I can do
A power.
clean. I was just going to say that
Yeah, and what I would look at, and we can do this actually when we're doing our practical, let's look at both movements with the same load. I want you to lift both as technically well as possible and both as fast as possible. And we'll see, we'll put the theory to the test. I'm going to hazard a guess that the power clean is going to be a faster velocity than the full clean. But we'll investigate it, and I think that'd be quite cool as our own intra case study within this workshop. Can anyone think of any other reason why you could justify programming in this setting a full clean versus a power?
So when you write that velocity thing, it's almost like you don't need to squat, so because it's so fast that you just don't need to squat.
Yeah, and like within a program, if within that program they're squatting, I think that's the, you know, when they're squatting, that's when we want to drive that strength adaptation. But perhaps, and this I've come across this setting where, you know, we may only have time to fit one lift in the program that week, one lift and one lift only. You know, a person challenged me and I said, well, if I did the full lift and then I got a velocity aspect and the force aspect to it, and I was like, you're a smart individual. You know, you get more bang for buck in that setting because you can't squat separately. You don't have the time for, you can only pick one lift. And I found that person had a really good rationale, and I couldn't disagree. So, you know, in the ideal setting, we want to separate, you know, our force exercise in terms of our squat and improve that adaptation separately to our rate of force development exercise. But if we're in a position where we cannot do that, I think, you know, you stand a very strong argument that's very hard to counter argue. And essentially we've got loads of variations. Like I said, we've got our jerk variations, our snatch variations. We can go from deficit. Again, they've all just stemmed from the weightlifting culture. You know, there's many variations, but more variations and more exercises equals more coaching time. So it all comes down to how much time have we got. So this is a snapshot of when I was in Leinster and what happened over the years, why we had many exercises at one stage and how we actually fine-tuned it and the rationale behind that. So when I started with them, they were programming many variations because that's what they thought was the best thing to do. They looked at the programs from the collegiate level programs in the States, and we looked at the literature at the time, and there were so many different exercises. We thought, well, if we're not doing one of them, then potentially we're missing out, aren't we? But no one really got good at any particular exercise because we changed them every 3 weeks. Every time a new program rolled out, an exercise changed. So how good did they really get at the exercise, and were they maximizing the adaptations? And we figured they weren't. So then what we did was we said, well, look, let's just choose one exercise and get technically very good at that, because we only get to do it for 15 minutes a week, and we don't even get to do it every week. So at least we can track this exercise and we can look at the progress. And then we removed the portion from the floor. And we didn't catch for players who didn't feel comfortable catching. And we did that as follows, because this piece of research came out in 2011 from Comfort, and essentially what they looked at was as follows, that the higher the bar started, the greater the rate of force development. So the higher the start position, the greater the rate of force development. So there was less margin for error by removing the first pull. And that's what we talked about earlier on. And that actually makes a lot of sense in practical setting, and then the research supports it as well. And we can see that there as well. The highest rate of force development comes from a mid-thigh clean pull, albeit still at isometric level, but it's from a higher start position. And then if we look at a technical score sheet, so this is very much something that we put together when we want to teach athletes how to lift technically well from the get-go. These are it's kind of like in the speed mechanics model or in the speed workshop, like these are the technical requirements to be able to lift safe and sound. You can see it's quite detailed, okay? And if we remove the catch and we remove the first pull, we're removing a lot of time spent on coaching cues. And again, it's not that we're becoming lazy by doing that. We're trying to be very time efficient with what we have available to us. So then essentially from 2013 onwards, like I said, we removed the portion from the floor, but only for the players. Essentially, we removed the portion from the floor for those who weren't really that good or didn't care about it. And the ones who had spent time, so essentially the players who were in sub-academy, academy system going right into the senior team, those who wanted to and were technicians were allowed to do so, and they felt there was an element of, I can lift from the floor and you can't. And we let them, as long as they were technicians. And then it was the same with the catch. Okay, so they caught it if they felt comfortable catching it, and if they didn't want to catch it, they didn't have to catch it.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed this. Did you use the 4 years to get to that? So 2006 to 2010, using those 10 for a few years to work out what kind of worked and what didn't work?
Yeah.
So you used that transition period to kind of go.
Yeah, we got to 2010 and we said, look, we're not getting out of all these. What are we really getting out of all these exercises? And we said, well, look, let's just go with one. Let's look at the research, the literature. What do we feel we can actually coach really well? Which exercise of all of them allows more adherence to the program? So by having anything overhead, that already removed a certain part of the population. So we said, well, let's make sure it's not a snatch or a jerk or any derivative from that. So that isolated it down to the clean, and we said we'll do the clean high pull. So that's kind of what guided us in that direction initially in 2010. Excuse me. And then we looked at, in 2011, the research that emerged from Comfort, and then we said, okay, well, we're kind of going along the right lines here. And then by the time we got to 2013, we had the majority of the players that were transitioning into the senior team had all been there. I'd say for at least 95% of them had all come through our full academy and sub-academy system, so that they'd all come through that technical pathway. So it was a nice way of going, okay, well with that cohort we can say, you know, the ones who are real technicians, you can lift from the floor if you want. The ones who aren't technicians, they have no issue not lifting from the floor because they can't lift as well. And then we said, yeah, catch versus no catch, choice is yours.
Did you then, across that year, did you use different derivatives from a clean high, hang clean high pull, or do they actually generally have that in their program for the whole year?
Yeah, they had that in their program for the whole year.
You can get a little bit bored of doing the same thing over and over and over and over again.
No, not really. So what would happen is their focus, and I'll show you this in the program in a few minutes, if their focus was developing max strength, then they didn't do it as a training exercise. It was just part of their warm-up. So they didn't associate it with a performance tool. So maybe, to be fair to the concept, it wouldn't be in the program as a primary lift for more than 8 to 12 weeks. And outside of that,
that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. No.
Obviously there's other ways to kind of, like you say, skin a cat.
Yep.
You may find that may not be the best way to do it, but that's the end goal. I get that. But
Yeah, so
there might have to be different ways of doing it.
definitely. So during a strength speed phase, that would be the exercise. And then during a speed strength phase, the exercise would become a secondary lift in the program. The primary lift would either be plyometrics or a hex bar jump squat or resisted sled runs. Definitely. Yeah, I think that answers it now, doesn't it? Because I didn't quite get the question issue when you asked it, so it's a fair question, because you want to keep them stimulated and you want to keep it fun, and you want to get the adaptations. And I found that even when the guys were doing max strength training, that if we didn't have it in the program at all, then when we did throw it back in there, they had no technical exposure to it, say for 8 to 12 weeks. It required a few weeks for them to relearn the movement. So if we kind of try and kept it in there somehow, it meant that when we increased the load and focus on that performance adaptation, that it was still there. So we're going to go back into our groups. And what we're going to look at is we're going to devise a 4-week program, and we want to develop weightlifting skill in there for performance, for sports performance, athlete or individual, of your choice. There's no wrongs here, okay? So you can decide how you want to incorporate this into a 4-week program. And all you need to really show me is just a snapshot of one day of a full week, and just kind of elaborate on how that would evolve over the 4 weeks. I'll explain that again. Okay, so I want you in the 2 groups to devise a 4-week training program. And I just want to see, if you just say, for example, it's a 3-day training program that operates over 4 weeks, just show me what happens in day 1, day 2, and day 3. You don't have to show me how that evolves over the 4 weeks altogether, but just what happens in day 1, day 2, day 3. If it's a 3-day program, it might be a 2-day program, it might be a 1-day program, it could be a 5-day program. The choice is yours. Any questions?
Do you want intensities, percentages?
You can choose. Yeah, you can go as detailed as you want, or you can choose not to. There's no right or wrong here. All right, I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay, so like, again, some really good discussions there. Okay, so let's talk about this group first. Okay, so what are we looking at? How many days per week?
Could be 2 or 3. Yeah.
We go 2.
I like 2, because then you've got, like you're saying, with your speed day and max day that we were talking
Flex
about.
would be 2 days, wouldn't it?
So, yeah.
We go 2. Perfect. So let's look at day 1. Talk me through day 1.
Speed day 1, didn't you?
No, it's the max day, the day 1. Yeah, you do the heavy day first, and then you do the speed day. Sort of say there's a Monday, Thursday, for example.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So we're in is the group in agreement? Yeah. I love this part of the workshop. It's my favourite part.
Well, I just sort of said like conjugating.
Kind of made it up as we went along.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So exercise 1. What's the focus?
Primary is we've got thigh, hang clean or high pull, depending on
So mid thigh.
hang clean or high pull.
Okay, so clean. So, and is this a max strength day or is this a force day?
Yes, sort of, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no.
Max strength. We don't normally go to 1 rep max or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So,
Lifting a heavier, slower velocity.
okay, perfect. Exercise number 2.
We had a lot of variety on there. I mean, we were talking about front squats, but we were talking about a lot of other things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go with front squat. I like the sound of it. Is there an exercise number 3?
We were just saying that the accessory depends on the strength, the structural balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's create a hypothetical situation here. Let's say this individual struggles to come out of the bottom of a front squat. Has really good eccentric control going down.
Backward slid drag to the VMO, for example.
Perfect. Okay, so is there anything else we could throw in there?
Maybe banded VMO work.
So some terminal knee extension stuff?
Yeah, I was talking about like last 15 degrees of extension
Yeah.
attached to a band or band attached to something.
Yeah. Anything else? So we're targeting very much the quads in the first 2. Is there anything else they might struggle with?
Like terminal knee extension.
Yeah, so you got a band
Yeah.
around
Okay, yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
extend it like that.
Maybe some specific glute work,
Yeah.
maybe the thrust or something. Yeah.
Perfect.
Which has hamstring alignment, so glutes posterior chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Really good. So I like that in terms of day 1. Let's look at day 2.
So same primary but faster velocity.
Okay, perfect. So on this day, would you have had a slower velocity band?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe that 0.75 to 1,
Yeah.
and then here.
Faster, yeah, 1.5.
And cool. You know what I really like here? How we're just keeping simplicity in terms of more coaching time with that exercise. And like you've just explained there, the load will separate that the difference between the 2. That's excellent. And then in terms of exercise number 2.
Possibly, but I'm not sure about. I'm not sure about because it's a speed day.
Yeah.
This hex bar jump squat is something I'm quite interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so that's really good here. So then I'm going to challenge you based on going on that. I really like it. In terms of the order of the exercise on that day, would it become more efficient if we swapped them?
This is where I'd like to try alternating them within the same set. So A1, A2.
Yep.
So you just put add an A, yeah, 2 on the end. Or 1A.
Yeah, it's the same principle. Okay, cool. And again, and again, like what we talked about just there, guys, on that short break when we were putting the program together, what we were discussing was, you know, how we want to make sure if this is working is we want to try to be objective about this, record the data we're capturing to really inform us, is this working? So again, with that push band, it's a kind of unique way of doing this, and that's the fun part of coaching, really, isn't it? We're going to trial something, we're going to give it a good go, we're going to record the data, and then we're going to be very constructive and look at what is happening, and potentially we find something works really well for, you know, this client or that individual, and another person it may not work with, but we're experimenting, and that's guiding us in the direction of trying to ensure we're getting that adaptation. I really like that. Would we add anything else into that program on that day?
I'm not sure what to call it, but you know, like your terminal knee extensions.
Yeah.
Like a kind of a jump where you're jumping that last 15 degrees, jumping sideways, or maybe just jumping straight up and down initially.
It's like some lateral bounds.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about just that little jump, sort of that sort of one leg and stick. Sort of,
Yeah, so let me try a demo. It's single leg bound and stick.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
What single leg bound and stick? Yeah.
Okay. Good. Could we include anything else in there?
Again, comes down to the mobility
Of the individual? Yeah, so we can.
Swings even.
Sorry?
Maybe kettlebell swings. I mean,
Yeah. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. So exactly, we're looking at that part of we're trying to create a hypothetical scenario, because what we're trying to do is go, okay, well look, in terms of the draft program, in terms of the adaptations we're looking to achieve, this is very much the general consensus. And then, yeah, look, thereafter, you have to give me an individual to go, okay, this is what we're going to work on. I really like that. Okay, that was excellent. All right, let me find, here it is. We'll rub that out, and then we'll go on to the next group.
Shoot, I got football to go to.
No problem. Thank you very much, Wes. I appreciate it. Yeah, and as always, thanks for your contribution. Really, it's a good day.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Change jacket. You'll probably get upset with me if I say go, really.
Okay, so group number 2. Oh. Nearly losing the whiteboard. Okay, so what are we thinking? How many days per week?
3 days.
3? Sweet. Okay.
So day 1, like speed strength, and power cleans.
Yep.
Second would be like strength, like a max strength, stroke hypertrophy front squats. And accessory, I'd put in goblet squats and back extensions, like volume.
Excellent, love it.
Day 2, high pulls, not hang high pulls.
Yep.
Romanian deadlifts, same again, like a max strength or hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Accessory, T-spine mobility volume, so like 20 reps, hip bridges. Some more corrective kind of stuff in there.
Yeah, individual accessories. Yep.
Day 3, more pushing day, so push press, max strength. Accessory would be like a military press, superset reaching arms. And then accessory would put like Y's, T's, W's and inverted rows.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, very much upper. I'm losing my ink here, but upper rear chain. I love it. I really like that program as well. So like a great example of 2 good programs, and very much variations between both programs, and both are really good. Both have a strong rationale behind them. Both are very much experimenting with, the hypothetical scenario of this. If this is the weakness, this is what we would target. I really, really like that. Any questions on both those programs? Meter group, no? No, really good. I'm hopeful that means that the content that's been presented is very well received, because we're immediately using the concepts and the methods, and we're applying them in this program design section. So that's fantastic. I'm really happy with that. I'll move this out of the way. Oops, the daisies. So it won't be long now, and we'll get into our practical. So I just want to show you a snapshot of what a program can look like when I would program this at different stages in terms of the development. So you'll see here, this would be like an Academy Year 1 player whose focus is on developing max strength. So this was a primary. This is actually a live example of when Joey Carberry was in Year 1 at Academy. you know, he's a young kid coming out of school, not very much of, he didn't really have much of an S&C background, so we focus on developing 2 strength exercises in this program. Day 1, box squat was exercise number 2, and hex bar deadlift was exercise number, day 1 box squat was exercise number 1, and the hex bar deadlift was exercise number 2. On his lower limb, day 2, it was flipped. His blue zone, which would pretty much consist of his accessory work, okay? But what you'll notice as part of his warm-up, we would put in some technical weightlifting movements, and that wouldn't go past 5-10 minutes. And he didn't see this as the developmental technique for when we get onto our speed strength section. He just saw this as most individuals do. When you tell them it's a warm-up, they see it as, this is a warm-up. So it's a nice way of kind of disguising, and that's essentially a lot of what I do here. And the camera's kind of turned off, so it's fine. A lot of what I do is I disguise my methods when I coach people, so they don't really know that this leads to something else until I have them long enough and they've caught on to it, or they study, you know, anatomy, physiology, and exercise so that they can see the pattern. But that's essentially the best way I find is, if I want to get them to do this, okay, I can't get there overnight, so I kind of like, I fill it in over time, and I fill a lot of stuff in my warm-ups and in the kind of what I call my blue zone or robustness or accessory portions, because again, like I said, they don't know, they tend to, most people I coach tend to just think about this as, that's the program. You know, they see that as the program and they see everything else as either a warm-up or a cool-down. But I find that's a really unique way of sneaking in the stuff that either A, they don't like, or B, that they don't see where that's actually going to lead to. And then this would be a program that was for Adam Byrne, who would have been a year 3 player, and he is very, very strong. And this is his strength speed program, where he will be doing plyos as his primer. But the bulk of his workout is broken down into his hang power clean being his primary lift, and that being his assistance exercise. So, you know, essentially, you know, the take-home pieces from what I've discussed here today is that by restricting our exercise selection, we really can get more exposure and get the individual we're working with, or the group of athletes we're working with, an awful lot better at that skill to improve the adaptation of maximizing rate of force development. So they reach technical mastery an awful lot sooner, and we saw that really well in those program examples. By incorporating that one lift twice per week, they're getting an opportunity to get better at it. We can also track progress. If we're changing the exercise every week or every 2 or 3 weeks, we've got to track an awful lot, and it becomes harder to figure out, you know, is it what part of the neural aspect are they improving? Is it just a motor aspect, a synchronization aspect, or are they actually improving that adaptation? And then we want to remember the goal. It's you know, we want to improve adaptation, and if we can be velocity specific with it, it allows us to really justify how much are they going to lift, or at what stage are we going to, you know, stop the start or finish part of that exercise. So look, with that, we're going to now head into our practical, get warm and start lifting. Yeah. Yep, sounds good. Let's just take 2-3 minutes if anyone needs to go to the toilet, and then we'll get going.